Hello, everyone, and welcome to Solving the SIEM Problem, a hard reset on legacy solutions. Today's webinar is sponsored by Huntress and produced by SmartBrief. My name is Keith Ward. I'm with SmartBrief, and I am truly excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to the content, though, there are a few housekeeping items I need to let you know about that'll help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. We're going to have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation today, so keep sending in those questions throughout. Now, that Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues you might be experiencing. A browser refresh is the first thing you want to do if you can't hear something or see something, because that'll fix most of the problems. Sometimes it takes a couple of refreshes, just FYI. Now, if those refreshes still don't work, let us know in the Q&A and we'll hop on it and provide you further technical assistance, which may or may not be helpful. Hopefully it will be. All right, next up, head over to the handout section. That's right over there next to the questions tab. There you're going to find a bunch of great free resources. Now, I'd especially like to call your attention to two PDFs from Huntress, an early access data sheet for SIEM and an ebook about how to solve the SIEM problem. Boy, those are some resources I would love to have right now. I'm going to download them after this, and I think you should too. All right. Finally, at the end of the event today, we're going to be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one of you watching me right now. Now, you do have to be in attendance during the entire live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. I like to say that in my announcer voice because it's pretty boring stuff. So scroll to the bottom there and you'll find the link with the details on the prize right there. And with that, folks, why don't we get to the main event? It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. They are Zuri Cortez, Product Marketing Manager, and Seth Geftick, VP of Product Marketing for Huntress. They are with me now. Gentlemen, it is so good to have you here today.
Thanks so much, Keith, and thanks everyone for joining. We're really excited to talk to you all about SIEM. So Zuri's calling in from Austin, Texas. I'm calling in from Greenville, South Carolina. So representing a couple time zones in the US. So I know it has the word marketing in our title. Don't get stressed about that. Both of us have been in cybersecurity for decades, spending a lot of that time working on SIEM tools. Zuri's a former sales engineer, and I've been doing this longer than I care to mention. All right, so today we're going to talk about SIEM. So no doubt if you've joined this call, you're somewhat familiar, hopefully, but we want to get a good gauge of you from the audience of how familiar you are with SIEM, and that might help our talk track and help us answer some of these questions for you as they come in. So are you very familiar with them? Zuri's middle name is legally SIEM. We made him change it to that. Do you have heard it before, or is this really brand new topic for you? So let's go ahead. Let's wait a couple seconds for you all to hit click the answer that works best for you. All right, let's see what the numbers are looking like here.
Hopefully no one says a what. That's the trick answer I put in there. So says that one.
There we go. So it looks like there's some familiarity, but somewhere in the middle too, which is great, right? And then a few people are very familiar with SIEM, which is awesome. So hopefully this is helpful for all of you, but that does help us tailor some of our questions and answers a little bit for you. So appreciate that. So what are we going to talk about today? So for those of you who've been using SIEM for a long time, or whether you're just joining for the first time and this is kind of a new area for you, we're going to give a very brief history of the birth of SIEM. I find it helpful to understand why we did this in the first place, and that puts in context why we think it needs a shift. So in addition to the history of SIEM, the current state of SIEM, and why so many SMBs and MSPs are really struggling to solve their security and compliance problems with SIEM today. And then no doubt the part a lot of you are most interested in, the future of SIEM, talk to you about the Huntress Managed SIEM offering. I'll give you a TLDR sneak peek of what we're going to say. We have come up with a new approach to SIEM that is less costly, less complex, less noisy, and is completely managed by Huntress. So hopefully that entices you to stick around. And then please use that Q&A button. We're going to answer them live. We've got our friend Henry on the line too, who's going to jump in during the Q&A if there's any super technical questions that are just a little bit more deeper than what Zuri and I care to answer today. All right, let's jump into it. Let's talk about the birth of SIEM. So there's two main reasons SIEM came along. SIEMs is kind of an OG in the cybersecurity vendor category. Like, it's been around forever. Before there was EDR, before there was XDR, before terms, for better or worse, like next-gen antivirus existed, SIEM was still there. And SIEM was solving two main problems. The first is that we saw an expanding attack surface. So the attackers had more areas they could hit us with, and organizations did not have the visibility to know what was going on in their environment or understand how all this data somehow correlated with each other. That, combined with the headache that is compliance, or sometimes we call it the C word in our industry. This is obviously an extremely small sample of some of the guidance and regulations that you all have to follow, and that gets even deeper in different sectors. So you have two main problems here. You have data sprawl and attacker surface that attackers can hit with, and compliance. Right. So what did people do? The first thing they do is they're buying more tools. I need more visibility tools. I need more tools to manage this. I'm sure you all have a lot of tools. Zuri, I remember you were telling me the other day, how many tools do we have at Huntress?
I think it's like 2 for every employee, and there's like 400 employees. So you can do the math there.
Yeah, it's like 700-800 different tools that we have internally that are spitting out data that ideally we'd be monitoring and making sure everything's going right there. So as we have to say, mo data, mo problems. So we have all this information coming into our analysts or into our IT department, but we don't have the skills to process that all data and know what to do with it. We have tons of complexity, and then we have too many tools, and we want to reduce that down and look at it all in a common user face. All of those is what drove the birth of SIEM today, but it's not all great. So SIEM was two categories merged together, one SIM and one SEM. If you've been around long enough, you remember those acronyms. They put them together to spell SIEM, which we say is SIM. If you say SIEM, we won't get upset with you, but a lot of people say SIEM as well. All right, so what is SIEM? It's a solution that helps organizations detect, analyze, and respond to security threats before they harm business operations. Sounds simple. It's been around forever, so clearly it works, right? Not exactly. Not for everyone, at least. So why don't you tell us about the current state of SIEM?
Yeah, so, like Seth mentioned, right, SIEM was born out of necessity, right? There was a lot of problems with, collection of data first and foremost, and centralization of the data. Lots of, disparate tools that are out there that are really just kind of floating around, right? If you think back to, just think for a second, what do you actually have in your environment, right? You've probably got firewalls, you've got maybe some AV, some EDR, maybe you've got a WAF, maybe you've got, a bunch of other tools. And so really what happens with SIEM itself, right? And the goal was to really take a lot of those logs from those tools and really centralize them into one platform. Obviously, with SIEM, there's really 3 components that come into play as far as what SIEM is supposed to do, right? Obviously, the first one is log centralization, which is collection of those data and bringing that in. That's typically not good enough, right? I mean, yeah, I can collect all the data and put it into one location, but after that, I need to actually do something with the data itself, right? So then that's where threat detection comes in, and then taking the data and analyzing it and then kind of making sense of it, and really kind of getting some additional context around the log data, right? It's pretty difficult, I would say, to collect data and then kind of look at it day to day. And I know a lot of people are trying to solve this with AI and trying to say, hey, well, let's just let the like an artificial intelligence kind of deal with this. But for those specific patterns and nuances that pertain specifically to your environment, you still need humans from that perspective, and you still need the log aggregation to be centralized in one location, and then threat detection around that. And then obviously, of course, the third one is reporting compliance. Like Seth said, right, it's the favorite C word. I think it's almost turned into a swear word at this point. So might have to beep that out from the webinar. But these are the 3 core components of the SIEM in and of itself. Now, SIEM, while it solved a lot of problems, it also created some problems. And so, for those of you folks that are familiar with SIEM, I've heard of it before, I would say these shouldn't be familiar to you, right? Number one, you have to do all the work, right? So if you've ever done DIY SIEM and you've deployed it yourself and you've managed it, I'm sure you know that the headaches of installing it, deploying it, getting those agents out there if you're using agent-based collection, syslog aggregation, API collection. So, a lot of that comes with the deployment and care of a SIEM it's pretty time intensive, right? It's going to take a lot of time and effort to actually do the work around SIM. And I think that's why a lot of people have just started outsourcing that and saying, hey, I just don't want to deal with this. Let me just send it out to someone else. Obviously with the deployment comes expertise. So, if you're lucky enough to have a SIM engineer, wonderful. Hang on to them. Like, they're basically diamonds at this point, right? Because they're extremely rare to find. I would say a lot of the engineers that are pretty familiar with SIM either become solutions engineers and work for a vendor, or they just work for one of those major companies and just handle their SIM itself, right? So, expertise is going to be one of those things across the board, even in cybersecurity itself, right? And just we don't have enough of it, and so being able to outsource that again is probably the go-to for most people if they don't have someone that's an expert at SIM in and of itself. And then the last one is always, it's going to cost a lot, right? So again, folks that are familiar with SIM, how much it costs, and it's pricey. Because you're collecting a lot of that data and bringing that in, you're going to pay for it. And so a lot of that data that's being centralized into your platform across those different sources that you've got, it's all being collected, it's all being stored, but you're also paying for that data typically by ingestion, whether that's, gigs of data ingested or terabytes, right? So, Seth, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, this sums up pretty much the problems we've seen today, which is the amount of time it takes to run a SIM, the amount of expertise you need, and the amount of budget you need. Works great for the top 1% of organizations out there, but as we like to say at Huntress, what about the other 99% of us? SIM solutions were not built for SMBs. They were not built for MSPs. They were not built for IT departments. They were built for large security organizations. And in fact, Zuri, you and I have seen this working on SIM tools in the past. There are customers that we had whose job was to run the SIM product. Their entire career was to be an expert at XYZ SIM because the tools were so complex that they built their entire career being, we'll go old school, like ArcSight, analysts. And that was their main job, is they were experts at the tool because your average person couldn't get value out of it.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, as you said, the three core problems are here. I was mentioning it the other day, the last point, 183,000 annual spend. If I had 183,000, I'd probably buy myself an exotic sports car. But
he's been talking about McLarens for like a week now. Since then. Yes.
If you're watching McLaren, let me know. I'm gonna collect commission on you guys. So really, there's three points that we want to focus on, right? When we were building SIM, what we didn't want to do is essentially say, hey, we're going to build a SIM and we're going to call it good. If that's what you're looking for, I would say there's probably hundreds at this point of SIM vendors that are out there that you can just go to, and it'll be SIM as usual. But when we started kind of digging into what are the important things that our customers specifically want and our community is looking for, we really came up with three points, right? Number one, it's too complex. Number two, it's too noisy. And three, it's too costly. So these are the points really that we are trying to solve with our platform of SIM, to address the complexity of SIM, right? A lot of the data that's coming in, a lot of the potential dealing with the aggregation of the data and tuning it and adjusting it, the noisiness of it, right? So if you've ever dealt with SIM, I'm sure your favorite word is probably false positives, right? So dealing with those and dealing with being able to kind of tune out that noise that typically is common with SIMs. And, I mentioned it already, right? It's too costly. So keep these in mind because we're going to circle back to these here shortly. But these are the core problems I would say that we're trying to solve for.
So what is it about SIM that's failing SMBs, right? The reason we built a SIM is because for years at Huntress, our partners were saying, Huntress, please help us out with this. Like, we do not have good options here. We need a SIM. It's an important part of our business for both security and compliance. And a lot of other things, but we first said, okay, great. What do you need? So we interviewed hundreds of customers and partners to find out what they needed. And we'll show you those results in a second, but wanted to get your thoughts on what is the biggest use case you're trying to solve with SIM? Obviously, you're probably trying to solve almost all of these, but which one is the most important to you? If you would take a second, get your keyboard warmed up and answer some of these for us, we'd appreciate it. Give us an idea, see if it jives with our data as well. Starting to see some of the poll questions come through. Give it a couple more seconds. So you see someone here on compliance, threat detection, incident notification, reporting, integration of other platforms, and automated responses. All right, let's go see what the results are. About overwhelmingly threat detection and visibility, with compliance coming in this case, a distant second, which is kind of interesting. Not too far off from what we saw from interviewing, again, hundreds of partners and customers, which again is number one was threat detection and hunting. We also heard a lot of people saying, hey, we need a single pane of glass, which is kind of really an old school SIEM use case there. Take all this data from different disparate data sources and show it to me in one central place. Very similar to the promise of a XDR platform as well. But compliance coming in a close third. What was interesting to Zuri and I when we looked at this data is this was you could choose many answers here. Almost every one of the use cases, more than half the people said, yeah, we need that, we need that, we need that. So what we're seeing here is that SMBs, MSPs are no different than the large enterprises in terms of what they need out of a SIEM. They're just dealing with a tool that wasn't built for them, right? And we know this because organizations kept saying, hey, it's hard to get value out of the SIEM. It's slow, it's complex, it's riddled with false positives. And it takes us days really to find things using it from a security perspective, which doesn't really work out because if you look at the Verizon data breach report, majority of hackers can get in and out within 24 hours of a threat starting. But it definitely takes usually more than 24 hours to collect all that data, analyze it, and then react to it after you investigate it with a SIEM tool today. So we looked at all these things and said, this is broken, right? The SIEM industry is broken for most of the marketplace and most organizations out there. Something had to change. So we wanted to build our own SIEM, but not just be another SIEM. Like you'll see, we have no interest in being another Splunk. We're not trying to match those types of vendors out there. We're reimagining the way SIEM is done to meet the needs of SMBs and MSPs. So Zuri, why don't you tell us what the future is SIEM is with Huntress Managed SIEM?
Yeah, so Seth mentioned at the beginning, I used to be a sales engineer, and so I've seen the evolution of SIEM coming from the DIY kind of approach to SIEM, going through to outsourcing and essentially the dawn of MDR and kind of being able to see the outsourced SIEM approach as a service. And I think what most of them have in common, if not all, is that they all really kind of focus around collect as much data as possible, centralize it, apply it correlation directives, whether that's in-house or outsourced. And then from there, just kind of charge our customers based on the data ingested, right? That's typically been the kind of cookie cutter approach to SIEM. And so what we wanted to do is kind of change that and really kind of define a much better way to do SIEM itself, right? So what you're seeing here is effectively the outline of how we see SIEM, right? So there's three pillars that we are going to focus on: is smart filtering, the threat hunting, and then compliance. And really, it's all going to be wrapped around the management portion, right? Obviously, as Huntress, we're going to manage the SIEM. We're going to still have that fully managed SIEM approach. So from everything from the deployment to the tuning, the maintenance, the care, creating those correlation signatures and such. So that all is going to be on our side, and we're going to take care of that. But these are the three areas that we're going to focus on specifically for this webinar, because these are the areas of importance that we thought were important for our SIEM. Now, the first one, the smart filtering. So what is it? So like I mentioned, right, the goal for most SIEM companies, I would say, is collect as much stuff as possible. And I think for a long time that probably worked and was effective because a lot of people just needed a lot of log data into one central location. Now, the problem with that, right, if you go back to our question or our problems that we had at the beginning, was complexity, right? So a lot of the data is coming in, but then from there, we have to then manage and massage that data. And it's really kind of leaving it up to the SIEM to kind of figure out, well, what's true, what's not, what makes sense, what doesn't. And so what we've done here is really we've taken a different approach to that log aggregation. We've just said, how can we get 80% of the good data, eliminate the 20% that's just noise, and then funnel that in a way that's effective for our customers? So really that's the birth of smart filtering, right? Is effectively taking the data from the perspective of how much of this can we eliminate from the start, right? So the top of funnel based, if you've ever seen the funnel of data coming in, eliminating it from the top first, so that then once we get to the lower layers, we can actually get a lot of cleaner data coming in, right? I'm sure if the folks know that, if you're familiar with SIEM, a lot of that data is probably useless. Either it's useless or you're probably using it or collecting it through some other means, right? Obviously, like For example, if you've got EDR, a lot of that data is going to be coming to the EDR side and then going into the SIEM and then kind of creating that duplication of data. And, some people might find that useful. I think most people, if they want to get to the crux of, what is actually going on in my environment, may not find that as useful. So really, that's kind of what we're doing. Now, to get a better picture of what that looks like, so on this slide, what you're seeing is the red is really the representation of the data that's been pulled in, right? So the common approach to SIEM is everything that's in red, we're going to pull that in, collect it, store it, and kind of keep it. Green, on the other hand, is actually what the data that we've collected post smart filtering, right? So pretty big difference, right? That you can see as far as the data that potentially could have been collected, but essentially was deemed as not helpful or useful versus the data is actually stored. Now, we've done our homework here. So it's not like we're just eliminating data and saying, hey, yeah, no, let's get rid of this, this, and that. We've done extensive amount of research as far as our other components, right? So we've got the EDR, we've got ITDR with identity threat response, and we've been able to look at that data and say, okay, from these sources, what is actually relevant for us and what is not? And so from that research analysis, we've been able to kind of tune a lot of that noise out. Seth, any thoughts on these?
Yeah, so smart filtering is a very simple concept that somehow sometimes messes with people's brains a little bit, partly because it's so simple. So the first question is like, well, why doesn't everyone do this, right? And one of the main reasons is from a vendor perspective, most charge by how much data they collect, right? So the more data they collect, the more money they make, the more they charge you, right? So they are disincentive because of the legacy way they built their SIEM to eliminate the data up front. It also a CYA thing to say, hey, we'll just collect everything and that way you have it and you can't say you don't have it anymore, right? So that's the first reason that it changes. So the reason we put in smart filtering was to do two things. Again, as already said, reducing noise and complexity, and two, significantly reducing the cost, right? Because it's a lot less storage costs, a lot less filtering, a lot less processing costs. That means a lot less price of the product, right? And the second thing is like, well, how do we know what to filter? So if you're unfamiliar with Huntress, we have over 100,000 entities that we protect, 5,000 partners that we have today, MSP partners. We have 3 million entities that our security 24/7 SOC manages and over 1 million identities there. So it's over 4 million identities and endpoints together. And I would say, I can confidently say without hyperbole that we have one of the best security operations teams in the business. And all they do every day is look at security events, right? Everything you can imagine, they've seen it all. They've responded to it all. They are the ones who is taking this data and actually having to protect our customers with it. So they know exactly what information they need in order to detect, investigate, and respond to incidents. And they know which is noise or junk or just rarely helpful to them. And because we know that, we're able to filter that out and then make sure, as long as you don't need it for compliance, that we have it and we know exactly what we need from a security perspective.
Absolutely. So I would say I got to set up for this one. If there's a hype slide on this entire deck, this is it. You'll notice it's just threat hunting and then coming soon. And there's a reason for that. So for us as a company, what we wanted to do first is focus on really two components right out of the gate, which was reducing the noise that was coming in as far as the data subsets, and then fulfilling a lot of the obligations for compliance as far as the storage of the data. Once we had those figured out, then we said, okay, now because we've got a lot of clean data that's coming in, we figured out how to eliminate a lot of that noise from the start. Now let's go ahead and build threat hunting on top of that, right? So essentially it's been a layered approach for us for SIEM. So threat hunting is something that is coming very, very soon. Actually, it's coming within the next month in October. So if you look at it and you think about it in the concepts of smart filtering is taking care of cleaning out the data, right? From there, we're taking that data and then building the threat hunting on top of that. What that tells you, and I think you guys know where I'm going with this, is it's going to eliminate a lot of those false positive threats and noises that are out there, right? The things that you typically spend a lot of time kind of dealing with. Maybe if you were doing it DIY, or maybe you've outsourced it and your vendor's sending an alert down, you're spending a lot of time on these noisy alerts that end up being like probably nothing, right? So that's why we've built it that way. So, I kind of equate it to buying a sports car with a okay muffler or exhaust system And then, you've got the sports car there. It's there. It's good. It goes really, really fast. But now you want to make it, you want to make it sound really, really good and make it sound like a sports car. So obviously you're going to, build an exhaust. You're making a cold air intake. Effectively, that's what we're doing, right? Is we've built the sports car. It's ready to go. And now from there, we're amplifying that and making it that much better, right? So Seth, save me from my car analogies here.
Yeah, I can't help you with the car stuff. That's all you. So again, if you're unfamiliar with Huntress, everything we do here is managed. Right? So we never separate the technology from the people. All of our products are built to be managed by our 24/7 team of badasses that we have here. So we have managed EDR, that's our flagship. That's what most people know us from. We have our identity threat detection and response, or managed detection response for Microsoft 365 tenants. We even have managed security awareness training. So managed SIEM is the exact same thing, is that we will manage it for you. Our security team will look at all the data coming through, and then we will weed out the false positives, find the interesting information, and then filter those up to the top so that we know what they are. And since we've got the question anyway, we'll answer now. There is no additional costs for the managed threat hunting. That is just part of the product. We never charge extra for that.
Absolutely. So the third pillar here is compliance. I'm sure, like I said, everyone's favorite word, right? So when it comes to compliance, right, what we want to do is assist with those mandates and requirements, right? So specifically when it comes to collection of data, analyzing the data, threat hunting on the data, right? Those are the different components that SIEM really in and of itself takes care of, right? So with compliance itself, the goal here is really to collect as much the data that we have as possible, analyze it once we have the threat hunting, which is, like I said, coming soon, and then from there being able to kind of assist with that compliance requirement, right? Just a note, right? So the typical, I would say, across maybe all compliance, if not, there's exceptions. Like I can think of HIPAA as one of them. They typically call for 1 year log retention, which we do out of the gate, right? We'll have the ability to extend further much later on if need be. But for right now, you've got that 1 year log retention that's ready to go. It stores up to a year as cold storage, or it's just long-term storage. And then we've got 30 days hot storage or short-term storage, which is really the searchable data, right? Again, right, most typical compliance requires at least a minimum 30 days hot storage. So you'll have that 30 days of rolling data that you can constantly search for within the UI. Obviously, all the data is going to be encrypted, whether it's in transit or at rest. So we do encrypt that data and make sure that it's protected. We will be creating more and more compliance mappings as we go along to the compliance, whether it's regional in the US, the UK, Australia, where maybe, obviously there's different types of compliance across the world, but so we'll be mapping to those as well. And then it's all wrapped up in that user-friendly portal, right? So portal itself is super friendly to use. The search engine is actually really easy to use. So the goal here is really going to be to essentially collect the data as much as possible within the confines of the smart filtering technology, and then essentially provide that for compliance. So as far as the takeaways are concerned for the benefits of our SIEM, you're seeing them to the right? Obviously, we want to skip the complexity of SIEM, right? I think SIEM has gone far too long being this complex tool that people have just decided either just to do without because it's just way too complicated to deal with, or having to outsource and then having to deal with a lot of the false positive problems of data coming in or incidents being relayed that end up not being something worthwhile. We want to capture all the data that matters, right? That smart filtering engine that comes in into play, where we're really going to kind of tune that noise down to really the things that are most important. Obviously for Huntress, our goal is to stop hackers. That's always going to be the goal, right? So across whatever platform or product or anything that we have, the goal is always to stop hackers, right? Point blank, that is the end goal. Assist you with compliance, like I mentioned in the previous slide, and then predictable pricing, right? So I would say smart filtering and predictable pricing go hand in hand. And the reason for that is smart filtering is going to lower those costs significantly because we're not going to collect a lot of that data that's kind of noise and needless. And then predictable pricing allows you to really just kind of tune your budget to the specific needs that you want without those kind of excess pricing increases that typically happen, right? All too often, like I said, I used to work for a few other SIEM vendors, and I've seen it pretty often where you're scoped at one slot or maybe one degree of a collection, and then it turns out you're actually exceeding that, or maybe you're going under, right? So, Seth, I'm sure you've seen that as well.
Yeah, when we did our interviews with partners and prospects and customers, they're like, what do you want in a SIM? One of the most common things people said that wasn't working for them was the pricing, right? So either you got this data source model that was so high up front that you never could afford it, or it seemed low, and then you would get these random spikes in the amount of data that you use, or like one machine was using a lot of data, and you'd get a big fat bill. And people almost said, I'd rather pay more upfront than have this fluctuation in pricing because I can't predict it from a budget perspective. So one of our goals here was to give predictable pricing. So for 99% of you, the price you're going to get will be for everyone, the price you're going to get will be the price you're going to pay. There won't be fluctuations. And we'll talk a little bit about how we make sure that we don't have that. But very few people will go over the amount of data allotment that we have.
So I would say the key takeaways, right, for Huntress Managed SIEM, obviously it's going to be managed out of the box, right? So our Huntress team, whether both the internal team as far as the management of the SIEM itself, and then the SOC obviously is going to be fully managing that platform. The smart filter engine, which we talked about, is going to be there. Predictive pricing, which Seth just talked about, really are going to be the three main components, right? And so they address and kind of link to the problems that we talked about earlier, right? It's too complex, right? So we're going to manage it for you. It's too noisy, so we're going to do smart filtering to do that. And it's too costly, so we're going to do predictive pricing. So, I said those would be coming back, and here's where they come in, right? Those are the three key components that we want to drill on and make sure that our customers we're addressing for our customers there. Anything to add there, Seth?
Yeah, I think that sums it up, right? So we are a different version of a SIEM built for this audience, right? So it's going to be easier to use, fully managed by us, give you the security value you need because our 24/7 SOC is going to be looking at all the data for you, which means low false positives, high fidelity alerts. And best of all, it's affordable and predictable in the pricing, right? Which is what people really need, because even if you love the big vendors out there that have been around forever, most people can't afford them. So,
perfect. So, now's a good time as any to do a trial, right? If you're interested, if you're curious about it, if you're like, hey, what is a smart filtering thing? How does it work? Now's the time to do it, right? Right now, you can run a 2-week trial until October. If you're thinking about it and after October you want to do it, hey, perfect. You can do a 2-week trial then is there. And Seth, I hear that there's like an incentive going on right now. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the way we price is by data source, right? So we charge by each data source that we monitor and we ingest. We have a cap on the amount of data that we have, which is 10 gigs per data source. That's all pooled. So it's not like if one data source goes above, that's a problem. It's all pooled together in your environment. But we really don't want anyone to ever really go over the amount of data and have that be an issue for them. So until the end of the year, if you sign up between now and December 31st, we'll double the amount of storage that is standard for us. So 20 gigs per data source instead of 10 gigs per data source.
Yeah. And what we found is it's very unlikely you're going to go over, right? So we've tested, we've been beta testing for quite a while with multiple different partners. And I think, Seth, it was like, 2 out of 400 that actually were able to go over that in their data allotment?
Yeah, it was only 2 of them. And then, we were able to adjust for them anyway. So we know that probably wouldn't happen again. But again, we do not want to go over. So what happens if you go over the data? Do you get charged more? No, what we end up doing is just truncating the amount of long-term storage we have there. So instead of a year, it might be 11 and a half months, right? And that way the price is still exactly what you need. And then obviously if you're like, no, I need more data, like it can't ever go below that, we're going to add the extended storage options in the very short term. So. Perfect.
So I know it's, enough about us just talking and presenting. I know there's some questions. So Keith, the man with the announcer voice, I'm going to bring you back in. What questions do we have here?
Thank you so much, Azuri. No. Okay. You are right. We have got some great questions coming in. First, I wanted to say thank you so much for that amazing presentation. I did some IT way back in the day, and I have to say I kind of miss the days of the walled garden, right? You had one internet facing connection. All you had to do was watch that one firewall. Everything everything else was behind that, but that's not the era where we're in anymore. And it's impossible to keep up anymore with everything so distributed, attacks coming from everywhere. I mean, it's never been harder to thwart these attacks, but that's why companies like Huntress are around to make that much easier. So I very much appreciate what Huntress is doing. And you're right, let's dive into some questions. You've generated a lot of interest here today. So the first one actually comes with a slide that you had. And this one is what somebody wants a deeper dive. You've talked about the pricing, but since there's a slide for this, let's bring that up and see if you can talk a little bit more, a little bit deeper dive into the pricing structure with some graphical help now.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we're supposed to do this, but we're going to do it anyway. Since we got a ton of questions for pricing, we just threw it in the deck anyway. So this is our direct pricing. So if you're an MSP out there, this is the list price that you would charge for. And then you would get your standard MSP discount on top of that for your margin. But you can see we charge by data sources. Right. And of course, as you get more data sources, the price per data source goes down, starting at 4, going down to 2. So if you do the math there, it's significantly less expensive than you're probably going to find from most big vendors out there, most big SIEM vendors. We mentioned before the promo, which is each data source today gets 10 gigs per month of data storage. That will be 20 gigs up until the end of the year. And a few things about that. That is by month. So if you have 100 data sources times 20 gigs times 12 months, right? Don't make me do math off the top of my head. I don't know why I threw a number in there, but that's how you would figure out what your allotment is. And it's a data pool, right? So if you have 50 data sources, 49 of them don't generate a ton of data, but one either keeps spiking or just is well above that 20 gigs, not a problem because it's all pooled together, right? If you're an MSP, it's for all of your tenants combined. So if you have one noisy customer and 50 quiet customers, not a problem. It's all in the same pool. Again, most of you, the overwhelming majority of you, 99% of you will never go over that data allotment at all. And all of that is on the filtered data, not on the raw data up front. So this is after the data has been filtered and put into your environment. So most of what we see is people being well below that, that volume size. Hopefully this is helpful. This is our pricing. If you want to take a screenshot of it, it's not a problem. We don't really play a lot of pricing games here, so that's the list price.
And that is a super generous amount of data, I have to say. The other thing you had mentioned earlier about this that I thought was really important is the predictability of pricing. You know, we all know what can happen in the cloud, you know, and the sticker shock that can hit any organization of any size. And, you know, some of the SMBs really are more at risk since their budgets are more limited. But it's something that's really useful for everyone to have that predictability. You know how much you're going to be spending, which helps your budgeting process, obviously, an enormous amount. Okay, another great question, and one that I'm seeing a lot here is, what log sources do you use? And because that's another current one, let's throw up another slide that we had prepped for that particular question that's up there now. So let's talk about that, your logs/data sources.
Yeah, I can take that. So when we first started with SIEM, we really had a few log sources, right? So we could collect from syslog, which CF and left kind of formats. We were a little bit limited on kind of what we collect there temporarily for firewalls, Windows events we could collect, and then LastPass. September has been really busy for us on the lab side, right? So as you can see, there's a lot more log sources, right? So recently, we added Fortinet, pfSense, WatchGuard, Meraki, right? We added Keeper, we added DNS Filter, right? So as you can see, this list is going to grow really quickly, right? We stepped out of beta basically in the summer, moved into early access. So you're seeing these actually grow more and more, and this is just in September alone now. Great, I'm not promising we're going to have 7 sources every month, obviously, but we're going to increase this more and more as we go along. And just to keep a note, just a note there on these names. This is not just kind of drawn out of a hat and just like at random or throwing darts at a wall. This is actually a list of things that you folks are requesting pretty often, right? So, if you folks have a certain data source or anything that you want to collect, I know that The last couple of times that I've been listening to folks talk about data sources, ubiquity was one that came up pretty often. Start adding those in through the request forms. We're listening to you, right? Obviously, the SIM was designed and built on your needs and concerns. So same thing with data sources, right? As you request them, those that are more popular, right, are going to be added much more quicker.
And that kind of responsiveness from your vendor is just so important, just because there's so much that is out there. So that is great to hear. Thank you. All right, let's get into some others now. Sama wants to know how much effort or time needs to be put in at the beginning to sort what data is a legitimate concern and how much is just people accessing the system after hours or off premises, etc. A big concern is people traveling and having to use VPNs, for example. Really, really good question.
Well, the great news is the easy one to answer because it's fully managed by us, which means almost no effort up front, right? So we are the ones who sort all the data and decide what's legitimate and what's not, and then surface to you only the things that we've investigated and say, hey, we see an issue here. This looks like suspicious activity and we need to follow up. So all that false positive, that noise of people traveling, that should be contained by our SOC and never surface to you whatsoever. Kind of a related question we get a lot here is about how difficult it is to deploy. So maybe it's a good time to get Henry some FaceTime here. So I know it says Jason Phelps on his name. He just likes to not tell people his real name. He's filling in for Jason today. Henry,
I like to hide myself through obscurity. It's fine.
Yeah.
And
security works.
Exactly. So how easy, it is. I can't stress to you enough how easy it is to actually deploy the SIEM product. It's our agent install, which is actually also our EDR. It's the same agent software as our EDR software to then deploy. And basically you just turn it on those hosts and we start collecting data. You then can also pick for syslog sources. Those machines then act also as collectors if you allow them to. And it's, again, super easy. You point the syslog and turn it on. With the kind of identity side of things, it's just integrating Keeper, LastPass, DNS filters for DNS filtering, obviously, but it's all API based that way. I will kind of backtrack a little bit and even say I view a SIEM as more correlative than actually true detection. We were kind of discussing it a little bit earlier as well. Yes, there are detections that are delivered through SIEM products, sure, but the real power behind a SIEM is to say, I have this thing that suspiciousness is going on, and I need to understand if it's a true positive. Now, with Huntress, we kind of get that with like immediate understanding with our EDR products and ITDR products, with identity, with M365 and things like that, to actually give you the specific incident reports that are true maliciousness and negating those false positives. I personally view a SIEM more as correlative, like, hey, I got this incident report. Is there more information to provide? And that's kind of when we start correlating that data together with our SOC, it actually adds up as 1 + 1 = 3 instead of 2 and that sort of thing. So
yeah, it is. There's been a lot of emphasis in this presentation today on what admins know as alert fatigue. And, alert fatigue is real and it's out there and it hurts your security ultimately because you stop being as alert as you were because you just get alert after alert after alert and you can't help but start to block that out. So it's so important that you're dealing with alert fatigue. So that is just great to hear. Okay, another one for I'm not sure if this will be for Henry, aka Jason, or someone else. But someone wants to know how commonplace is it currently for vendors to do something like smart filtering, which you discussed earlier?
Yeah, I can take that. So the concept is definitely there. It's just typically most vendors will call it tuning, and it's done after the fact, right? So The common approach to most vendors is, ingest as much data as possible. I think Seth covered this a little bit. Bring that data in, and then in the aftermath, right, post collection, post pricing, then do a lot of that tuning there and adjusting, right? So that's kind of where they're going to start filtering out and figuring out, okay, well, from these data subsets, what is a true positive? What is a false positive? And so the concept and idea isn't new. It's just never been done that I can tell. I think maybe there might be a couple of people that might have kind of started thinking this way to do it before, right? So smart filtering in itself, right, is as a whole, is the idea is not new. Just the way, the approach that we're taking it is actually pretty novel in the industry, where we're just saying, hey, look, we're going to do this anyways in the aftermath. So why don't we just do it at the beginning to start, get a good kind of clean subset of data. And then from there, the tuning aspect is much easier because the data you're starting with is pretty clean.
I'll add too that there was a question about next gen SIEM and kind of that and I think that actually kind of correlates a little bit between that question and the one that we're talking about here, where using AI is going to be the be all end all to help all SIEM data that comes through, and the advent of AI is great because you have it is a good thing for those vendors that just say give me everything, because AI is very good to be able to traverse through tons and tons and terabytes of data to understand patterns more so than a human. But why not have the information that is actually valuable in a security incident that then can actually be understood? And I mean, to the other side of it is, when vendors say they want to store all the things, it's also kind of secretly lining their pockets as a result of that too, as well as adding another tool on top of it to, again, double dip even in that regard, and then say AI will be the solution. There's always a new the solution when cybersecurity, it feels like. And anything labeled next gen seems to be that way as well. So
yeah, I appreciate that Ned also kind of trash talked the phrase that using the label next gen for security products. We agree with you there. Don't love it. So,
yeah.
It's next gen. This one.
The newest gen.
The newest gen.
That's right. Exactly, because what we need are more buzzwords in the industry. We do not have enough now, so we need to invent some more even. And there you go, Ned. You got a good answer to your question as well. Okay, next up, I'm going to bring up that C word again. Someone wants to know, what areas of compliance can Huntress help me with?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. So the common ones with SIEM traditionally are always log centralization is first foremost, right? So the common one there is going to be you must centralize your logs into one location. From there, typically the next one that comes up is then you must store and then analyze security events, right? This is actually a pretty interesting question, because if you dive deeper into that, and this plays into smart filtering as well, take PCI, for example. The wording almost verbatim is you must collect security events. And then it'll list out some data sources and say, hey, you must collect from firewalls, endpoints, servers, whatnot. And then, that's fine. It's great. But then when you want to kind of dive one step deeper and say, okay, well, what is a security event? That's where it kind of becomes blurred, and you don't really get a specific answer as to, well, a security event equates A, B, and C. You really don't get that. And so because of that, and I imagine this question may come up later, is, how do you deal with compliance if you're filtering out some data? That's kind of where we started to kind of analyze and saying, well, what is a security event and what is not? So if it's not, can we eliminate that, right? And so when it comes to compliance specifically, right, the collection of the data, the storage of the data, analyzing the data, reporting on those notifications, right? Doing a lot of kind of the response-based actions, for example, with using our EDR, right? Those are the areas of compliance that are kind of be pretty specific to SIEM in and of itself.
Great. Anyone else wanted to weigh in? Wasn't sure if I heard someone.
Yeah, I would just say it doesn't, nowhere does it say you have to collect everything. It says you have to collect the security events. And then, as Zuri said, what is a security event? Well, that's up for debate. So we have a very good idea of what a security event is, being a security company that's run by a 24/7 SOC. So that's where we've built our filtering from.
I will say also, even in compliance documents, I've done a number of RFPs, RFIs, and things like that, is very often the compliance itself is actually very generic, as Zuri was talking about. And then, but to be able to be a catch-all, people say we need to store everything, when very likely it's just those security events and things like that they're actually trying to achieve. There might be, maybe there's a extra regulation on top of it, maybe a risk, a chief risk officer has written into and said and expanded upon said compliance and saying this is good for our baseline, but it's not good enough for our company, or our space, and we want to make sure X, Y, and Z are covered. That's a different conversation. I mean, that's making sure that they're reducing their risk based on their perceived need in what they think is valuable for security. Totally valid thing to do.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that comprehensive answer on a topic, compliance, that is only growing more and more complex. There are more regulations coming down in America, in Europe, in Asia. Like every day, it feels like something new is coming out that you have to be aware of. And this is another reason I think that it's so important to have a partner like Huntress with you. You guys are going to be following that. That's part of your job, is to know what's coming out. And it's good to be able to offload that sort of information, that sort of knowledge, to the experts, to the people who do this all day. So again, thank you for that. I'll tell you what, folks, we are just about out of time now. I did want to ask one more question, and given the amount of questions that we have seen coming in, I want to ask kind of a softball one, but one that's going to be very important. I'm sure you have generated so much interest today that a lot of folks are wondering, well, how do I get started with Huntress? How do I take that next step? What do you recommend they do right after this event today? Whichever one of you wants to take that.
Sure, I'll take that one. I think the thing we would say is go ahead and sign up for a free trial or contact us for a demo. Those are the two best options. If you'd rather just talk to a human right away, contact us for a demo. Go to huntress.com and you can do that right on the page. And then also here to sign up for a free trial, check out the handouts that we gave you as well if you want a little bit more info. But the free trial is great because you get the full product. It's not a watered down version for a few weeks with no credit card needed, no pressure to buy whatsoever. It gives you a chance to really kick the tires on it.
Kicking the tires, say, on Zuri's McLaren, right? For
One day.
So.
One day.
Those are too expensive to kick. Those tires. Don't kick those tires.
You could kick them on my Porsche 911 if I had one. A little bit less expensive, but more fun on the track, I would imagine. Anyway, all right. As we said before, enough of the automotive analogies. Gentlemen, Seth and Zuri, and our late edition Henry, thank you so much for being with us today, for putting together a fantastic presentation, for your insights in the Q&A. It was a delight to have you on today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Absolutely. All right, folks. And with that, we are going to let Seth and Zuri and Henry get out of here while I wrap up the rest of this event. And what I have to do now to do that is give away the Amazon gift card that I talked about at the beginning. It's a $250 gift card, and you do have to be here during the entire event. As I mentioned, also, we do have a winner for this event, and that winner is Scott Vetter from Kentucky. So congratulations to you, Scott. We are going to be in touch to get you your card, so sit tight. And with that, folks, on behalf of the Smart Brief team, I want to thank Huntress for making this event possible. It was really a delight to have them on. It's always a delight to be with you, the attendees, as well. Thank you for your interest in this topic, for your great questions here today. That concludes the event. I'll see you in the next one, folks. Have a great rest of your day.